So hello, everybody. Thank you all for coming to the thesis presentation of Giorgos Korkidis. Let me tell you a little bit of context so that you can properly evaluate the fit that this thesis represents. So when Giorgos joined the project, there was this vague idea that cosmology imprints on the turnaround scale. But not only were we not certain on how to extract information from the turnaround scale, but the state of the art was it was not even certain that a single well-defined turnaround scale exists in realistic structures. All of our insight came from very basic spherical collapse calculations. So Giorgos joined the project and he did simulations, he did analytic calculations, he did statistical evaluations. And as it usually goes in a field that is wide open and in its infancy, really, the process towards progress is a complete random walk. So today you're going to hear a lot about what worked, but keep in mind that there was no set path for this thesis. So for everything that worked, Giorgos tried maybe another 5 avenues of exploration that didn't. And it is a great pleasure to have today a presentation of a field that really has a path forward on how to turn the turnaround scale into a cosmological parameters estimation tool. So without any further ado, Giorgos, the floor is yours.
Hi. Let me just put OK here, start the timer. Okay, so as the title says, in this work I have examined the signatures of the Hubble flow, which is another term for the expanding universe, around large structures in the universe, which are galaxy clusters. And I have assessed the significance of these signatures for cosmology. Yeah, so a brief outline. So initially, I will try to motivate a bit the discussion about what these signatures are. And there we will see that essentially what we are looking at is the transition scale between a collapsing structure, which are galaxy clusters, the structures that we study in this work, and the expanding universe, galaxies that expand outside, far away from the structures. And we will see that these signatures, or this signature, is best encoded if we use a very simple model of structure formation, which we call it the spherical collapse model. And we call this scale the turnaround scale. We will explore what information, what we can learn about cosmology from this scale. And then we will compare the predictions of this simple model with realistic structures from cosmological simulations. And I will try again to discuss and see whether there is a path forward in observing these quantities in real systems, real galaxy clusters. And then we will see whether we will try to address whether we can probe cosmology, actually, whether we can use these insights to probe cosmology. Okay? Okay, so every presentation in cosmology that respects itself has to include this little pie here. So what this pie wants to represent is actually our knowledge according to the standard model of cosmology, which is highly supported from observations, our state of knowledge about the contents of the universe. So according to this model, we think that the energy budget in the universe is dominated by dark energy, which remains one of the greatest mysteries in cosmology today. And we think that this dark energy component, which is about 70%, has the form of a cosmological constant. And what this dark energy component does is it causes the accelerated expansion of space that we observe from Earth. Now, an only small portion of the energy budget is in the form of matter, and specifically, we think that the vast majority of matter is in the form of dark matter, cold dark matter specifically, which says something about the velocities of these dark matter particles at the early universe. And only a very small fraction of the overall matter in the universe is our well-known baryons that makes our bodies and the Earth and the Sun and so on. One of the great successes of this model, the lambda CDM model of cosmology, was that it was we were able through this model to have a very good representation of the how galaxies are distributed on large scales. A comparison, you can see a comparison here on the upper left corner for the people that are online with the blue color. What we see is the galaxy distribution as a function of distance around the Earth from two prominent galaxy redshift experiments. And here, as you can see, and as is typical of the distribution of galaxies on large scales, we see what we call the cosmic web. So the cosmic web actually, is a fancy name to say that the galaxies are distributed in this, like what you see here. And so one of the early successes, as I said, of the lambda CDM model was that it could statistically gives us the correct representation of the large-scale structures, and that's what you see on the bottom right plots with the red color. And here you see again the galaxy distribution as a function of distance, but from a simulated observer. So these bottom right distributions are actually taken from a lambda CDM cosmological simulations. Now, I'm telling you about large-scale structures, but because this is the focus of this work. So again, another look. This time we look at a snapshot of the distribution of dark matter from simulations. And again, we see this filamentary, the filaments in which galaxy clusters live and occupy. A galaxy cluster is one of the large-scale structures in the universe, and it have thousands of galaxies actually. And for example, in this picture, a galaxy cluster is represented by the bright spots that you can see. And as far as we know, these clusters are gravitationally bound systems, meaning they are. If we look at the matter around these structures, what we find is that galaxies that live outside of their centers are actually, due to the gravitational potential of the structures, they fall towards the center. At the same time, what we know is that the universe is expanding. So the question that I try to address here is, what is exactly the connection between, if there is a transition scale actually between the collapsing part of structures and the expanding universe, and what can this tell us about cosmology? Okay, so as I said, we can get some great insights by looking at the simplest model of structure formation, which we call the spherical collapse model. What this model assumes is we essentially think that structures are a bit ideal in the sense that the collapse of material, let's say galaxies, around a structure, I represent the structure here with the blue circles and the cells around them, the collapse is isotropic. So you have the same rate of collapse as of material as a function of distance from the center. Far outside from the centers of the clusters, we have the expanding universe, of course. And according to this model, there is a scale, which we call the turnaround scale, after which galaxies, you will find yourself with galaxies that are moving away from the structure. And on smaller scales, you have galaxies that are falling, they're collapsing due to the gravitational potential. Now, a very, let's say, nice insight and a very nice prediction from this model is that the density enclosed, the matter density enclosed in this scale is a universal quantity that's only dependent on cosmology and cosmic time. This means that according to the model, there is a threshold value for this density. And when a structure whether it is a group of galaxies or a cluster of galaxies, when a structure reaches this threshold value of the density, you will have turnaround after this point, meaning that you will find on average galaxies moving away from the structure. And a better way to see, to examine the connection between this quantity, the turnaround density, and how it depends on cosmology, it's to see how it evolves with cosmic time for different cosmological models. Here you see on the y-axis this value of the density, the turnaround density, normalized with respect to the critical density that's required in order to have a flat universe. And on the x-axis, we have cosmic time represented by the scale factor, which essentially tells us how big is the universe at a given time. A value of 0 here stands for the present time in the universe, positive values for future times, and negative values for past times. With the three different solid lines, I represent three different cosmological models. With green, we see a standard CDM model, which is a flat universe without a dark energy component. With red, we have an open CDM universe, which is a universe with an open geometry and no dark energy component again. And finally, we have our typical lambda CDM model, which I described when I started this talk. At early times, what we see is that at early times where we know that dark matter dominated the overall budget in the universe, the turnaround density evolves as the mean matter density in the universe. And what's interesting is that at late times, when we have a lambda CDM universe, we find the turnaround density to evolve as the dark energy density. And if we have an open universe, it evolves as the effective curvature, which means that at a given cosmic time, the turnaround density traces or follows the evolution of the dominant component in the universe, which means that if we measure it, we can actually get some insight on which component dominates. And so a better way to see what information we would get if we were to measure the turnaround density and its evolution with cosmic time is a thought experiment. So what we assumed was that we live in a lambda CDM universe and that we can measure the turnaround density with an about 50% error for a few tens of thousands of clusters up to a redshift of 0.5, say. Then what we find, and that's very interesting, is that the constraints we expect to get on the cosmological parameters, the matter density and the dark energy density, is represented by these pink ellipses here. And the interesting thing about that is that from the slope of these contours, you can see that we can get complementary information with respect to other prominent experiments of cosmology, which is the CMB, the baryon acoustic oscillations, and the supernovae. And hopefully this, well, for me at least, it was enough a motivation in order to start becoming a bit more serious on, observing this in the sky. But in order to attempt such an observation, one needs first to establish that these predictions of a very idealistic model, a very ideal model, the spherical collapse model, hold for realistic structures. And so what's a realistic structure? Usually the best way to study realistic structures is through cosmological simulations. There we know that galaxy clusters, you can see one here in this figure. What you see actually here is I found a big cluster in a cosmological simulation, and I have projected the dark matter density around it in the XY plane. So different colors represent the concentration of dark matter at different regions. And by no means is this a spherical structure. And actually, this is the turnaround radius that you see with the red circle. It's by no means obvious why the turnaround radius should lie here. So what I wanted to do actually was to see whether the turnaround radius of realistic structures and the density enclosed there agreed with the prediction of the spherical collapse model. So if the matter distribution around a single cluster cannot tell you where the turnaround radius is, where do you find it? And the answer is by looking at what the velocities do around the clusters. Here you see again a big cluster from a lambda CDM simulation, but now what the colors represent is actually the radial velocities of dark matter with respect to the center of the structure. So with blue, you see material that are falling towards the center, and with red, you see material that are moving away from the center of the cluster. And now, when you look at the radial velocity field, even by eye, you can actually distinguish that after, you can actually see that after the red circle, which is not very apparent here due to the projector, but after this red circle, you will most likely find material that are moving away with the expanding universe. They expand. And so, since I wanted to compare these, the turnaround density, the density enclosed in this red circle here from simulations with the model, what I did was I went to 3 different cosmological simulations. I took a sample of about 1,000 clusters. I measured through the velocity profiles the density in there, and I compared it with the predictions of the spherical collapse model. And interestingly enough, as long as we do not consider clusters that look like cigars or pancakes, meaning that they are not very non-spherical, we find that the prediction of the spherical collapse model describes very well the simulated clusters. And this is apparent by the points following these solid curves. The curves represent the prediction of the spherical collapse model. Y-axis again is the turnaround density, and the x-axis represent cosmic time through the redshift. And the different points represent the average turnaround density from simulations for different simulated cosmologies and at different cosmic types. So that's a very good thing. What this tells us is that while we use a very simple model of structure formation to describe the turnaround density, realistic structure seems to agree very, very well with these predictions. And that was the point where I felt like we need to get even more serious in measuring this, and problems started to arise because in order to measure the turnaround density or any density, you need the radius and you need the mass enclosed in that radius. The problem with this density in particular is that when we observe the galaxy distribution in the sky around clusters, we typically don't have access to the full velocity information of the galaxies with respect to the centers of the clusters. And so the approach that we use in simulations to measure the turnaround radius would be very hard to be adopted in observations. Not impossible, but it needs, let's say, it would require probably extended spectroscopic redshift surveys to map as well as possible the velocity field around clusters. And the second problem with that, and that was the most important one, was that even if we had access to the turnaround radius, we would still lack a way to measure the mass enclosed there. As a reference for that, in a lambda CDM universe at present time, we expect a big cluster to have its turnaround radius, according to the model, at around 7 or 8 megaparsecs. A megaparsec is the typical distance between our galaxy and the Andromeda galaxy. This is a huge distance. And while at the centers of clusters, we have mass proxies like X-ray emission or strong lensing, that would not be the case at such great scales. So we thought that it would be very, very nice if we had a scaling relation that would connect the turnaround mass, which is at a very large scale, with a mass that we can observe with another approach, like X-rays or what have you. And the way to construct such scaling relations requires us to pass through what we call a density profile of a cluster. What is a density profile? In very, very simple terms, what the density profile of a cluster shows is how the matter density changes as we move away from the centers of clusters, in very simple terms. And this is important because if you know how the matter changes, how the matter distribution changes as you move away from the centers of clusters, then you also know how matter accumulates at the centers of clusters or around the clusters. And so this can actually allows us, modeling these profiles can give us access to these scaling relations that we want. Now, when I say that we want to model the density profile, I don't mean the whole profile. What you see here is the whole profile at very large scales, many profiles actually, at very large scales around simulated clusters. On the y-axis, we have the dark matter density normalized with respect to the mean matter density in the universe around clusters. And so the x-axis represents the distance of matter around the center of a cluster. And we have normalized this with the turnaround radius. So as far as we know, at the inner regions of clusters that I represent with this shaded region here, on the one hand, we have good mass proxies. So up to this point, up to the scale here, for example, we will have access to the mass there. And on the other hand, modeling the inner distribution is very difficult to do it from first principles. There exist many models that do a very good job in describing this, but we wanted to get away with having fitting parameters. We wanted to ask the question whether we could have scaling relations that would be devoid of fitting parameters, because this would complicate things. Now, what I didn't tell you about, I forgot about it, sorry. Now, each curve here, because what you see is about 1,000 profiles from for a sample of clusters in simulations. What the color represents here is the profile density. So if it's very red, it tells you that you have many, many profiles passing through these regions here. And that means that the fact that there is such a very high profile density region means that there is a typical profile behavior on large scales. And actually, by modeling this behavior from first principles, we only assumed early Gaussian statistics at the early universe, and again, the spherical collapse model to grow the overdensities with time. We actually managed to get scaling relations. I just put the equation here of the scaling relation for the people that will be able to read it probably. But what would you see, what's important in this plot here is that we can, if we know a mass that are near the center of the clusters, a typical mass that we can observe, for example, is the M200. This is the mass at the scale where the cluster is 200 times more dense than the background universe. This is an observable mass, okay? Then what we see from this plot is that this mass here is very correlated with the actual turnaround mass of the simulated clusters. With the blue curve here, you see the median of the distribution of points along with its spread. And with the red line, you see the analytic scaling relation that we derived by modeling the outer profile. And this scaling relation only depends on cosmology. There is no fitting parameter here. And actually, the blue curve, which represents the median, and the analytic scaling relations only have an offset of less than 10% here. And this is true for simulated clusters at different cosmic times and different cosmologies. So this takes away the first the most difficult problem to measure the mass at the turnaround scale in order to get the density. And by modeling the outer density profile, we figured that we might have just solved both problems. The second problem was to find the radius. And so why can we use the profile to find the radius? It's not very obvious here, but I will try to break it down. So what you see here, remember these about 1,000 profiles from simulations? They follow a typical pattern. And what I did, I went to clusters at different cosmic times and different cosmologies. You just see one cosmology here. And I just extracted this pattern that's represented by, you know, where the profile, where we have high profile density. And so what I did was to find, I stacked the profiles that I found the average profile, essentially, right? That's what you see here with blue, with a solid line, I'm sorry, in the upper panel. So with blue, you see the average profile at a redshift 0, and we go up to a redshift of 1 with red. And with the dashed line, what I plot is the model that we constructed analytically in order to get the scaling relations. Now, since the model, okay, and one more note, sorry, I have not fitted any parameter here. I have just given to the equations the cosmology. So I overplot essentially the model on top of the simulated profiles. On the middle panel, what you see is how the slope of the profiles change, and of course, how the slope of the model changes with the dashed line. And finally, on the bottom panel, you see the ratio between the slope of the simulated profiles and the model, so that we can have a sense of how much they diverge. What do we learn from this, from the behavior of the profiles here? The first thing we learn is that we do a very, very good job on large scales. Specifically, after the turnaround radius, the profiles on the one hand become very universal, even though cosmic time changes a lot. Redshift 1 was the time when the universe have had half its size, keep in mind. That's the first thing we learn. The second thing we learn is that we do a very bad job inside. As you see, our profiles fail almost completely to describe the actual simulated profiles. That was expected since we assumed spherical collapse in order to, you know, build these analytic profiles. The most important thing, though, here is that the scale at which we have a transition, meaning the scale after which we start describing very, very well, without fitting the profiles, this is almost exactly the turnaround scale around the clusters, right? So that means that maybe one can use simple profiles of structure formation that you can derive analytically, go to actual profiles around clusters, and we will see why that works later on, and just track where these analytic models fail to describe the actual profiles, because this scale correlates very strongly with the position of the turnaround radius. Plus, you have a scaling relation for the mass, and so you can get the density. That was it. These were the main results. Actually, I condensed it as much as I could in order for you to not get completely tired from this. And so what are the main conclusions of this work? What did we learn from this study? The first thing we learned was that the average matter density enclosed in this transition scale, the turnaround scale, is a universal quantity that can tell us something about cosmology. It has novel information about cosmology. The second thing that we saw was that these predictions, and that was an unexpected thing, are consistent, very consistent with realistic structures from simulations. The third thing we saw was that beyond the turnaround radius, stacked density profiles of clusters are universal and are actually only or mostly sensitive to the initial conditions of the universe and to cosmology. Having such a profiles allowed us to derive scaling relations in order to get the mass on the turnaround scale. And finally, we saw that there is a path towards measuring the turnaround radius by using the deviation of actual profiles from our model's predictions. These were the main points, and since I am exactly on time, you will allow me 5 more minutes to tell you a few more things about some of the implications of this work and show you, future directions of my work. So actually, the implications are already there. The very fact that the outer profiles are sensitive to initial conditions and to cosmology means that we can use them, we can harness this universality in order to measure cosmology. The problem with that, so I'm going a bit back now, is that all the things that we've seen here are in 3 dimensions, and so when we observe clusters in the sky, we do not have access to the full 3-dimensional distribution of matter around clusters. So I wanted to test whether these predictions here would hold in a more realistic scenario. And the way to do that was to go to a light cone simulation. Very, very briefly, what a light cone simulation does is simulate an observer and how would the universe look around this observer. You can actually have multiple observers, but we are interested in one here. And so I went to that simulated observer and I looked at high distance, at large distances far away from him, and I took samples of clusters, of large clusters around the observer, and I found the distribution of galaxies around these clusters. And then I just projected those galaxies around clusters on the let's say, a mock plane of the sky of the observer. So that means that I had bright spots again in very plain language, which represented my clusters. This should represent the actual sky in an actual observation. And I found the number density of galaxies around these clusters. And this is what you see on the upper panel here. We have, again, the average number density of galaxies around about 500 large clusters at different cosmic times in the light cone simulations. And with the dust lines again, you see our analytic model, but in 2 dimensions this time, as we would use it in an actual observation. Again, in the middle panel, you see the slope of these profiles, of the projected simulated profiles and the model with the dust lines. And finally, you see how these models diverge, and you see that through the ratio. And again, but at this time here, because there was a bit of noise in the when I was comparing the profiles, I want to see what's the average in redshift, I mean, the average behavior, the average agreement between our model, which has no fitting parameter, just the cosmology, we just input the cosmology by hand, and the projected simulated profiles. And again, what I found was that on average, after the turnaround radius, our model did an excellent job in describing the projected profiles. And this, that should not necessarily be the case. And it was very interesting that we found that. But what was even more interesting than that was that actually, what I found was that this agreement between the analytic model and the simulations breaks apart if the cosmology that we assume in order to project the profiles on the sky and to calculate our model does not agree with the true cosmology. And you can see that with these 3 panels here. Actually, what I represent with the 3 panels is I plot this magenta line on the bottom panel, but at this time, in order, which represents, the agreement between the model and simulations, But what I change is the cosmology, the underlying cosmology. Here at the first panel, I change the omega matter parameter, the average matter density, dark matter density in the universe. On the middle panel, I vary the dark energy density. And finally, on the last panel, I change the Hubble parameter. And what we find is that as long as the cosmology that we assume to calculate the model and project the profiles is not the right cosmology in which the simulations were run, we get a very, very bad agreement between the model and the simulated profiles. So actually, one can run a Monte Carlo algorithm to see what constraints you can get on the parameters. And what we find from that was very, very interesting. What we see is that what we did was we just compared our analytic model with the projected mock profiles, right, of the galaxy distributions around clusters. And interestingly enough, the constraints that we get for the omega matter and omega lambda parameters are very, very, very much like standard ruler constraints. These are awfully like the baryon acoustic oscillations constraints, but there is a difference. And the difference is that while baryon acoustic oscillations are actually a standard ruler at a fixed scale, I don't have the time to tell you exactly for those of you that don't know the baryon acoustic oscillations, but essentially we have, let's say, we have a very good signal from the early universe at about 150 megaparsecs away from clusters. And we use the signal in order to constrain the cosmological parameters. And this approach, using the turnaround radius, the turnaround scale as a starting point, after which profiles become universal, we harness this universality and we actually have, again, a standard ruler that's only sensitive on cosmology and cosmic time that gives us information about the underlying cosmological parameters. And this scale, actually, this standard ruler, in contrast to the baryon acoustic oscillations, is also sensitive to the cluster evolution. So there is most likely more information in that scale, which just sits there and expects from us to harness it. Yeah, and that was it. I was in time. Just a few acknowledgements. I'm deeply grateful to my supervisor and mentor, Vasiliki Pavlidou. Much of what I am as a scientist today is owed to her. I thank Kostas Stasis. He has been there through the beginning, and our discussions have been very, very important for me. I would like to thank Paolo Bonfini. Everything about machine learning and Monte Carlo algorithms and many, many more. I'm in great debt to him for teaching me that. I would like to thank Tanio. He's part of the committee. He's, I think, he's the human face of science, and that's a great virtue in itself. And he's also a great collaborator. These last results that I show you were produced with the help of Tanio. He's helped a lot there. I would like to thank Susmita Dikari. She helped very much. She helped me very much in understanding density profiles early on. Eva Dormusi for teaching me how to analyze simulations. Vincent Pelgrims. He again also, he helped in many ways. Professor Andrea Zezas. Any question you have, you just go to him and he will get you a very good answer. Kapetanakis Giannis, this laptop wouldn't work without him. And finally, our late Theodore Tomaras, because many of the early ideas of this project are very much owed to him. And finally, I won't name every one of you, my office mates over the years, because, it's very boring without people to do anything, actually. And I would like to dedicate this to my family and to my friends, all of you back there. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Giorgo. Do we have any questions from the audience? That is to say, not members of the examination committee, either in the room or online. Nico.
Giorgo, it seems to me that you have gone a long way, starting from basically zero, as you said, and finding your way. You reached the spring, but you didn't quite drink water from the spring.
Yeah.
The data didn't quite allow you to drink water. What happened, and how can you circumvent that?
Nothing happened. These results here are actually a few months old. And I mean, these are not even part of my thesis. These, this is very, very new stuff. So I had to do lots of tests before going to observational data, because you need to have an idea of what to expect, right? And while I have, I'm already using and analyzing data from the SDSS or the Dark Energy Survey, the galaxy distribution, there are still things that we need to figure out, mainly, I think, about how we select galaxies around clusters before attempting to fit these profiles. I can fit them. I get very similar contours, but they have a bit of an offset yet. So I need to figure things out before, going to production. So nothing happened. We just need a bit more time, and that's it. Okay.
Other questions? Dora?
Sorry?
UoC data. Your data calculations are connected with UoC, low redshift data, yes?
No. Actually, in 3 dimensions, we find the profiles to be the model to describe very well profiles up to a redshift of 1,
Yes.
which is, it's enough. And the projected profiles also work up to a redshift of 1. I just didn't include them here because
No, because it's lower than, for example, CME.
oh yeah.
Yes, but your fitted Hubble constant, the fitted parameters are closer to a veil, the Baronic postulation values. So it means that your Hubble constant, what you can use to fit your data, is closer to the high redshift data.
No, that is not true, actually. You see, and if I didn't understand your question very well, just stop me. But I assume that you refer to the offset that we have of the 1 sigma contours, for example, towards higher values of the H naught, right? Here we know the true value of the H naught because these are from simulations. The true value is given with this, red cross. This offset is related with this offset here as well, with an offset that we also have on the omega matter omega lambda plane. This is mainly related, actually, with some assumptions we do about the collapsed mass of a structure. Mainly, the reason why we get this small offset is that when we feed the collapsed mass of a structure at the model, because it requires that, we use the mass M200. And this produces a very small offset. This is related to the mass. And we are trying to work around this. For example, the splashback mass, if I don't know if you are familiar, could give some corrections to that. This mass takes into account the accretion rate also of the cluster. This could also help. So no, this is not related with an offset that we find between the distant early times Hubble constant and late times. I don't know if it could help for the tension though, right? It could help, and the reason for that is that this standard ruler works at local scales around clusters, and clusters, there are plenty of them, and they're just sitting targets. And new surveys will just bring more information about clusters in the future. I hope I answered.
Other questions? Yeah.
So I have a question about the scaling relation.
Yeah.
So my understanding is that you wrote down an analytical relation,
Yeah.
and then you went to simulations, and you try to see if the analytical relation that you derive
Agrees with the simulation. Yeah.
Okay, and the observable here is the M200.
Yeah.
Okay, so in a realistic observational scenario.
It's not the easiest mask yet, but yeah.
Okay, but you will observe that.
Yeah.
I was wondering if your scaling relation you took into account incompleteness effects that can affect a lot of the surveys in general.
What do you mean?
I would expect that a scaling relation, in order to be representative of the entire population, to be based on a whole sky survey or something like that.
Yeah.
So, given that this scaling relation is based on simulation,
Yes.
did you take into account the incompleteness that probably a realistic survey, cluster survey, will add to the data?
So the incompleteness, you mean, for example, selection biases that we might have when we observe clusters in.
Exactly. The clusters that they exist in the sky, but the technical limits of your survey do not allow you to see them.
Yeah.
But-
No, I did not. No, I did not. But that's a great idea, and we can do it together.
Okay.
If you like. I mean, it's very interesting, but it's no, that would be a big work in its own right.
I'm sure for that.
Yeah.
Is the biggest problem in
Yeah.
surveys.
Yeah.
When
No, I think what this tells us is that there is an underlying relation, and it can give us some understanding on why you expect a different overdensity masses to be connected and how. That's but selection biases would be a whole other issue.
And because I was thinking that if you manage to take all the data from survey and put it in that plot, maybe you will see an offset or something like that.
Yeah.
And this maybe most probably is gonna be the result of the incompleteness that we didn't account in the.
Yes, sure. If for example, preferentially we went and picked this part of the population for some reason or due to some selection bias that we have, then yes. But on the other hand, I mean, I don't know. I feel like that we are starting to have met lots of classes. I mean, there are tens of thousands now that we have observed, or even more, hundreds of thousands. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, we should. We can discuss this.
Is it in the plan?
Yeah, sure. Yes. Well, the most direct plan is to use to harness the universality of the profiles on large scales, right? The slope specifically is very universal. That's the most direct plan. But of course, it's one of the plans to develop more of these scaling relations.
Any other questions? Do we have it?
I
Okay,
will ask
Nick.
again, since nobody else is asking.
No.
So how much more time is needed, Giorgos, to reach the spring and drink water?
I don't know.
Estimated. Well, from your experience now,
Well,
would it be another year or two or many more?
look, that's no, we can. So, what I lack the most right now is collaborators that are very, very involved with observations. So if I had such a collaborator, there are a few, but I mean, having to complete the thesis, I didn't have time to discuss this properly. It could be a matter of 3 months to just apply and get some, at least, zeroth order results, to get some constraints, and then improve on them. So I hope that by the end of the year, we will be able to have some contours from dark energy survey, which I'm already, messing with the data there. If something goes wrong, because always when you are dealing with real data, many things come up. It's a dirty business.
Incompleteness.
And incompleteness, yeah. So I don't know what might come up, but I'm optimistic that by the end of the year, hopefully we will have the constraints out.
And what are your plans until the end of the year?
Well, applying for jobs and
Getting the constraints out.
getting the constraints out, yes.
Other questions? Anything from the folks online? Okay. If there are no more questions, let us all thank Giorgos again.